This is the Miller philosopher. One of the Fellowship's earliest gut punches is the discovery of Balin's colony in Moria, or Khazad, which I will use interchangeably. A dwarven realm that was the home of a great people now turned into a gravesite and the site of a massacre. Ori's skeletal remains, the scarred book of Marzabul, and the remnants of the final stand of the dwarves in the tomb. And if you watch the Hobbit trilogy, this hits even harder because these weren't just nameless dwarves or characters. These were characters that we knew. Balin, Ori, Oin even somewhat. It just hit differently and was even more disturbing for that. It's a feeling of kind of projecting yourself through the eyes of these dwarves that you knew and imagining fighting a battle without hope and about to be overrun by orcs. And to quote Theoden,
how did it come to this?
So the question is, why would Balin do this? Why would he take this chance and come back to Moria knowing what was awaiting him? Well, we know the broad scopes of it, that the dwarves of Durin's folk had been booted from their ancestral home for about 1,000 years and had long sought to return to it. And this desire led up to the horrific war of the dwarves and orcs, but the Balrog still lurked in the deep. And also too, just for the record, I consider this the first war for Moria in this regard, and there will be a video on this later on. Dain was the only one who saw the Balrog, and he said that only a power greater than themselves will be able to cleanse the demon from that realm, because he knew that trying to resettle Khazad, as it was then at that time, would have been hopeless and just a repeat of history, basically. And this gnawing desire always ate away at Durin's folk even after Erebor had been retaken from Smaug, and the dwarves had become relatively prosperous in Middle-earth. Even though many of them regarded it as cursed and haunted, I think it also was mixed with a sense of desire to go back, to retake it, that they had everything but this one most important thing to their culture and their history. They couldn't let go of that ancient bone no matter how good things were. Their true home and pride of their people was still in enemy hands, as it were. At the same time though, that's not the whole story. And if I'm being honest, I think Fellowship kind of plays down the exploits and the heroism of Balin's expedition. Because the expedition wasn't done out of blind arrogance. It was a tragedy that was built on hope, timing, and a series of unknowns that could not have been predicted. Longing alone only explains part of the motivation, but not all of it. Because I don't think it was an accident that the expedition back to Khazad was led by 3 members of the same dwarven company that went with and fought with Thorin Oakenshield. On the surface, the circumstances are pretty much exactly alike. The dwarves are evicted from their ancient home by some creature, a long period of time goes by, nothing happens, and then a dwarven company goes back to take it back. But of course, Balin must have known about the stories about the Balrog. Why wouldn't he? There would have been legends about that within the dwarven race. So again, why would he risk it? I think this is because the retaking of Erebor actually inspired Balin. Balin was there when Thorin reclaimed Erebor, and he saw the impossible become a reality. In the films, he's rather skeptical of the possibility, even though in the books, he's loyal. Either way, he witnessed a miracle, and that changes a person, even a dwarf. If a dragon, a monster of the First Age, could be defeated, if a lost kingdom could be restored, why not Khazad? Either way, the quest was successful despite the death of his king. And, to be fair to Balin as well, he didn't rush into it. He waited 48 years, about half a century. More than enough time, one would think, for someone to hear some rumor, some intelligence, some inkling that if the Balrog was still there and active. There was no way for him, nor the other dwarves, to know that a Balrog was not like Smaug or any other dragon. It wasn't motivated by greed or treasure or conquest, but rather literally was just pissed off that someone had woke him up underneath the mountain. Durin's Bane was hiding and didn't want to be found. It really wasn't interested in the conquest of Khazad. It just kind of happened as a consequence. And moreover, the orcs were supposed to have been cleared from the Misty Mountains during the First War. So, if you put all these pieces together, Balin went back to Khazad because he was inspired by his fallen king and the hope of possibility that not all that was lost was gone forever, and that there was no report of the Balrog was still in Khazad, or even alive for that matter, since it had been such a long time, and that the orc infestation was supposed to have been resolved. So, from Balin's perspective, the stars were aligned. Now was the time, just as Thorin thought when we went back to Erebor. Dain Ironfoot, though, had seen the Balrog once. He's the only dwarf alive to have done so, and immediately knew that it was beyond dwarven power, thus giving the warning and prophecy that only a greater power could exorcise Khazad. But the thing is that Dain saw it once and never again, and again, no one had heard anything of it since then. So, to Balin, I think silence meant safety, essentially. And again, the others from Thorin's company that went with him on this expedition shows that Balin was not the only one who felt this way. It's been argued by some Tolkien fans that about 3,500 dwarves went with him on top of the 3 that were on Thorin's original expedition. And that makes what happens there kind of more tragic. What is later known was that when the dwarves had arrived, they basically did a repeat of the First War, where they went through all of Khazad-dûm's halls and basically killed every orc that they came across, cleared out all their strongholds and so on, so that it was basically safe to recolonize. After this, they pretty much prospered for about 5 years. Things seem to have been going well. Even contacting Erebor and establishing communications with them, saying that they were starting up mining again and that they were going to reopen the trade routes. So everything seemed to be worked out. We had a repeat of the miracle of Erebor. But after that, things went silent. And while this was not because of the Balrog, it turns out, it was because of the orcs. Because apparently reinforcements had arrived back in the ancient halls. And again, I don't think the story gives enough credit to just how heroic the dwarves were during this encounter. So much so that, for me, I think of it as a second war, if you will. That being said, Balin himself was killed early on by an orc arrow by the lake, and the dwarves fought viciously to get his body back and bury it. And as with all encounters between the two races, there was vicious and bitter fighting with no quarter that was ongoing for quite a while, apparently. That it wasn't a matter of the orcs just kind of going in and overrunning everything. A lot of them were killed trying to kill the dwarves, basically, because they're fucking dwarves. But the advantage of the orcs has always been their numbers, rather than their technology or their tactics. So, the dwarves were, over time, forced to fall back deeper and deeper into the mountain, until finally they got separated, with some trying to escape out the west gate, where Oin was killed by the Watcher by the lake, because the lake apparently had risen, and they didn't know about it, and where the others were basically finally trapped in the tomb of Balin, where the rest of them were killed fighting their final stand. Now, I don't think this whole expedition was folly on the part of the dwarves that went to Moria. They had good reason to make the attempt, just as they had good reason to go back to Erebor. There was just more unknown factors involved with Moria than there were with Erebor. And even Dain's foreknowledge about the Balrog could arguably be seen as outdated information. Dain had never even heard of a Balrog, so he didn't know what it was that he saw at the end of the First War. He just knew that it was something that was big, bad, and powerful enough that the arms of dwarves were not going to take it down. And, on top of all that, no one knew about the Watcher in the lake either, nor that the lake had apparently risen so high that it was now right by the gate, whereas before, it was not. And, again, there's the aspect that no one knew about how many orcs were actually there, or that reinforcements could be called in at any time, because, again, as far as the dwarves knew, they were all wiped out or mostly wiped out. So this wasn't folly, this wasn't stupidity, this was the tragedy of timing. Balin's expedition wasn't doomed because they were arrogant. It was doomed because they believed. And, to be fair to them as well, in the Fourth Age, that belief is justified by a later expedition, and again, in my opinion, a final war, that finally cleanses Khazad and retakes it permanently. But the point being is that for this particular incident, Balin's people believed the miracle of Erebor could happen again, and for a time it did. They believed that the silence meant something, and that their home could be restored. And that's ultimately what makes Moria so haunting. Not everything that happens in Middle-earth is by the machinations of great powers or fate. A lot of it, perhaps more likely even, just happens by chance. And unfortunately, Balaam's expedition was on the wrong side of that. This is Miller Philosopher. You guys have a good day.